Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Engagers, today we have a sponsor for the episode, and it is none other than Blue Rabbit, who has been twice on the podcast and is leading an online 3-day workshop with gamification basics that lets you walk away with a complete gamified system. Find out more at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. Hey, Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have today with us a very special repeat guest, which is David Chandross. We already interviewed him once. You can see the whole jazz on that interview episode that we had prior. It was, I think, I'm going to look it up and tell it to you in a second, but I think it was episode 57 if my memory does not fail me. We'll check it out and validate that. But welcome once again, David. Welcome back to Professor Game. Are you prepared to engage once again?
It's great to be here, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity.
Glad to have you on once again. I know you've been working on plenty of exciting things lately. So that's exactly, it's actually not 57, but 58. I just confirmed. Episode 58, quite a while ago. This was launched on December. Well, actually, almost 3 years ago today. So wow. It's a very good timing as well for a repeat interview here. David, you know, your bio has changed. So, of course, listeners can look at that into the episode show notes. What has changed in these past 3 years? Very quick overview, and then we'll dive deeper into some of those things. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that the entire field of serious game design has taken on an incredible body of research that continues to be produced on evidence and nuance about variations in player satisfaction and engagement. The neuroscience of video games is advancing. They now do functional magnetic resonance imaging studies of different parts of the brain during video game performance. The understanding we have of behavioral neuroscience to go a little beyond dopamine into some of these lesser known neurochemicals that seem to be involved in things like shame and pride. We know a lot more about literature about shame and pride and human motivation. And on the game design end, I have changed my path to some degree. I've moved very much into an area we'll probably talk about of semiotic resonance and transpersonal and psychedelic and complexity theory contributions from these fields, which make gamification a lot different than it probably was about 10 or 11 years ago. So the whole world is changing around me, and I struggle to keep up and synthesize these things to improve my approach.
Plenty of things going on around the world. And what about your professional practice as well? What are you doing now that you weren't doing then? Because I know you're also teaching, you're still associated with Ryerson University.
Yeah, I have a real course. We teach, I'm a faculty member in the Masters of Digital Media program at Ryerson. I get a small number of students, under 20, a year that come through the program and take my course in serious game design. And I supervise 6 to 8 graduate students. They have to do a thesis. So you could imagine the kind of theses that are done, thesi, by grad students interested in gamification. I mean, just the stuff I learned from them that blows my mind. Augmented reality, Unity integration, progress bars. Instead of marks, you get a growing bonsai tree. As you progress through a course, your bonsai tree, you get planet and terraforming. So instead of seeing your marks or grades, you might see a terraformed planet showing feedback. I mean, crazy stuff is going on with my students. When I last spoke to you, I believe I was probably doing a residency at a local college trying to get them going with gamification. I'm now with the World Health Organization, where I was invited to work in augmented reality and mass casualty management simulation, which we can explore in a moment. But I started talking about games more and more, and they have a World Health Organization Learning Academy with $100 million of funding from Lyon France, from Marchand and the gang. It comes from the senior level of government. And the WHO is part of the UN, part of the United Nations. They aim to be the most sophisticated health professions training unit in the world. And they brought in phenomenal firepower. I mean, curators of museums and experts in audio and sound and learning, behavioral neuroscientists, game designers like Kat Schreier, who you've had on a previous broadcast. She works with me there. They are putting all their guns, virtual reality, augmented. They're really going for it. Along the line, it came up that they should design a game design unit, and they put me in lead. And we set it up. And now every course produced by this academy will be gamified. Huh. And gamified, as we know, doesn't mean it's a game. It might mean that you take game elements. You know, people like Amy Jo Kim, her discussion of how to use game elements, or Andrzej Markowski, how he talks about it. You don't have to make a game. You can add narrative to an otherwise dull course, and you've gamified it to some degree. So we have a model. We've developed the first emotional cognitive performance profile. Every course will be designed by subject matter experts with an instructional designer who then comes to the game design unit, and they hand it over to a game design team. And then we produce the game for them. We have an RFP that went out for a lot of money to build a game engine. And I've been working with the Launch 57 game engine called Reach for a number of years and other projects. And a game engine is something where you can build any game onto it. You can build any kind of rules or mechanics and add. Because when I came to WHO or the UN, they were spending maybe $100,000 to get a learning game built. And it's only one subject, like hand washing. Well, now you want to teach nutrition, you have to go spend another $100,000 with a game company getting that done. Game engines allow you to build. A company called Game Learn in your native country, Spain, has done this very, very well. And then there's another company called Blue Rabbit, Bernard Latifa, down in Mexico.
Yes.
There aren't many game engines available in the world.
Yeah, there's things like Unity and all these things, but I don't know how well they're suited.
All they are is video production. You can't put mechanics in there. See, game engines are basically currency generators and currency sinks. So that's how any game engine kind of works in this field. I read an article, I answer a quiz, I get 100 gold. I go in the game and I access higher level content with my gold, or I can buy some upgrade in the game that lets me play the game better. So a game engine is a grid of currency sinks. And that's how a lot of video games work. They're really currency sources and sinks. I beat a monster, the monster drops loot. My loot gives me the ability to hit monsters harder and take on more challenges. So we have a request for funding that's going out very soon in the next week so to game companies. So we have a game design unit that's effectively working. And so WHO is doing it, which is amazing. They have an incredible team of people that actually get it and are willing to work with us. Last year, I produced a game for the United Nations World Food Program with a hefty budget from donors called Sharmilla, and that is free. And you can give your listeners the link. They can, anywhere in the world, can download it for free and play it. And it was produced with a game company called Chaos Theory out of New South Wales, Australia. So I designed the game along with a subject matter expert who's been on the ground doing food relief work for many years. There are 80 million people starving in the world right now. So it's a big, big problem. And the game was designed to teach a model they called protection. And protection is a more holistic view of food insecurity. So you can drop food to people that are starving in Ethiopia, but if there's 10 miles of landmines between you and the food, then it's no good to you. Or if the signs are in English instead of French. So this idea of holistic food management, they wanted to teach it in something other than a manual. So we have a game, and it was released in the past month or so, and all your viewers can download it and play it for free.
Who is it targeted towards? Like, who would be the ideal player of a game like Sharmilla? It's
targeted towards United Nations field workers that are working in the World Food Program. The World Food Program won the Nobel Prize last year. I had nothing to do with that whatsoever. I want to put that disclaimer out there. So people that work for the UN doing field work, like they're out in Africa and Latin America and Colombia and Mauritius and all these places with landmines and, civil war, and there's a lot of food insecurity. So they need to know this new model. Like part of the model is talking to indigenous people. Well, they never did that before. They would just do food drops or, they did a good job. But now we know the first thing you do, you talk to the indigenous peoples, and they might tell you, so that's really the intended audience to try to upgrade their skill way better than a 40-page manual because it's there's so many things to learn. It's better to learn them by doing than by reading.
Absolutely. That's part of the big argument we've always had, right? Doing things in games and doing the actual action, learning by that experience is actually a big change for education. That is, it's been a long time coming, and hopefully it's arriving more and more. I love to see your enthusiasm and your optimism around this topics, because I know, like, in this world, and especially something that is relatively niche, still to many ways, we have our ups and downs. There's times where, we're super optimistic and excited, and there's other times where we have a disappointment and it's like, well, this is just not going to work. So I'm super excited to see what that looks like for you and that sort of game design group.
You bring up some interesting things. I think in order to succeed in this world, you have to be prepared to let it go. Because if you really are attached to it, you'll lose it. Because you have to have a job, and you have to be prepared to be unemployed and live really simply, work at retail, whatever it is you need to do to keep working on your vision. Education is a gilded cage. So if you're working for an outfit and you want to go into game-based learning and they're not ready for it, then you stop, and then game-based learning stops, and anything you could have done in the field is over. You have to be courageous enough and a bit reckless enough to say, fine, then fire me, because this is the right way, and I have confidence that this is good. So now you have no job. But many leaders in this field prevailed. Michael Van Unen is spectacular escape room master. Andrei Markowski started to working for motivational companies and businesses where he could bring some of his skills. We've all had to, in gamification, pay some very hard dues because the world isn't ready for us yet. But if we quit, then nothing happens. And I'd like to feel that we're making progress, and I'm certain that we are.
I have to fully and wholeheartedly agree with you. Like, I don't share this too often, but like I've been getting requests for workshops on gamification in education.
Wow.
I've been getting, more people asking for gamification courses in business, in customer experience design, I'm teaching a workshop on gamification with the EFMD, who is a certifier of business school. So basically the audience is professors and people who work for business schools in education because they're interested in doing these things. I mean, at least as far as I can tell, personally, I can tell you this didn't happen to me 3 or 4 years ago. It's happening now, and it's getting a lot better.
And we have these problems, Robert, and I do like this kind of conversation we're having because I feel like we're having a conversation. And I don't know if there's enough of conversations. I think there's interviews. I think there's articles. But I think conversation, we're mature enough in the field that your insights and mine together make for a more meaningful listener experience. And I don't think years ago we could have had as many conversations because we were all protected by non-disclosure agreements. You see, every one of us that's doing gamification is not allowed to mention it.
Yeah.
Because they're spending whatever amount of money building a game, and so we're protected by IP and NDA. So the whole field is frozen, and they can't really talk to each other. The researchers can, but nobody really reads their papers, to be absolutely honest. There's some citation metrics behind gamification research, but it's not as central as, some new process for synthesizing gold. So we're not allowed to talk to each other because we'll get fired if we do. And even with the WHO and UN, I have gotten in, several times for going public with the work we're doing and then being slapped by the communications department and saying, that's supposed to go through us. But sometimes it's better to do and apologize than to ask permission. And you hope to God that doesn't end you on, in a prison cell somewhere. But there's an area I'm kind of so interested in now. And this is something that it's hard to talk about because so many people don't understand the geography, but there's been huge advances in the area of the use of psychedelic agents for the treatment of depression by Roland Griffiths at Harvard, at Johns Hopkins. In Toronto, there are clinical trials all over the city at all the major teaching hospitals on the use of ecstasy, MMDA, the use of ketamine. It's a 1-hour psychedelic experience. There's training courses in psychedelic psychotherapy. It's been approved in some cases in the United States, psilocybin for the use of end-of-life depression. And I think That, along with my interest in virtual reality and altered worlds, virtual worlds, what we might call virtual landscapes. I call them game worlds. These converge for me, partly because I teach some mythology, some of my background. So I build all my games using mythology right now. If it's not explicit, I refer to the mythology, because if I build a game using mythology, it will appeal to someone from Zaire or someone from Iceland. Yeah. Otherwise, you have a game that you build in America that's not that interesting to somebody in southern India. They don't care about your narratives and storylines about building an empire in New York City that sells submarine sandwiches better. Like, they couldn't care less. But every mythological, the game I'm working on now, and I'm under NDA on it, I can just give the rough sketches, is based on Norse mythology. It deals with the Battle of Ragnarok, in which we finally destroy evil, and then it's called the regeneration. And the regeneration is this world without evil that we'll all inherit. Well, and it's only inhabited by 2 humans at first to populate. That is so Noah's Ark. It's so Christian. It's so Islamic. It's so apocalyptic Jewish. So I've got to say I've moved into this so that all the games I design are basically Netflix historical dramas. My last few games of Sharmila with the UN is a huge storyline. Carthage is a game in use right now. Carthage takes you back to ancient Carthage, which was founded by a 25-year-old black woman. So you don't have to go on about Black Lives Matter if you can show that black culture drove the development of civilizations. Africa had many advanced civilizations. Now, you can either preach that for EDI and diversity, or you can, in the game, have the player in awe of the achievements of African civilization. So we design with what's called a narrative, and we design with a meta-narrative. The meta-narrative is the philosophical and spiritual, if you will, what Maslow would call self-actualization, end of training. So there's a philosophical message, and our messages are usually pretty basic. You're going to work with people from different cultures, and what better way to understand them than to marvel at the history of their culture? A lot of people would have a lot more respect for the black people all around the world if they understood the 700 nations that made up Africa with their own technologies and beliefs and very advanced philosophical systems. Sorry, Robbie. I think you get the sense of where I'm going with this universality of.
Yeah, there's plenty to do on that. I was sort of hearing back and just jumping for a second back into Ragnarok.
Yeah, of course.
I was in Peru and for work, right? So I was traveling around in Ubers, and I suddenly asked for an Uber and says, Ragnarok is here to pick you up. There was a person, I mean, it's a free country. His parents called this man Ragnarok, and I was just like, I took pictures. I have with the person. I have a screenshot of the Uber telling me that Ragnarok is here to pick you up.
It's a powerful mythology. All of our days of the week, a lot of them are named from Norse. Friday is Freya's day, and Thor is Thor's day. Thor is actually killed in the Battle of Ragnarok. He's poisoned by a giant snake, and the venom gets to him a few days later. So all of our great heroes and gods. So we built Carthage, and then we built another game, which is now in use in educators. There's about 50 people taking the course right now, called Hypatia. And this takes place in urban Detroit. You're a team of immortals, and those immortals are all about 2,000 or 3,000 years old. And it uses Neoplatonic philosophy and the idea that we're being invaded by a galactic species called the Parthenians, who made a decision when the cosmos were created to be selfish and to not participate in intergalactic trade. So they're very much like the Borg, and they drain humanity of its will to create and to innovate. And that condition is called acedia. Acedia is a term that comes from the Christian monks in the medieval times, and it was one of the worst sins in Christianity. Acedia is what we all went through in COVID. It's where they call it Blur's Day. When one day merges into the other and you're not looking forward to anything and you don't even know why you want to get out of bed in the morning, The monks called that accidia, Accedia. So I took this concept and I sat down with a Christian professor, a professor of Catholic mysticism from U of T, and I said, how can we build a credible storyline? The idea being that these are people we're training to be educational innovators. And what goes on in workspaces is the destruction of creativity and this kind of homogenization. And then Hypatia, because we want a feminist agenda, Hypatia is she's one of the first professors we had in history. She was a mathematician who was killed when they burned the Library of Alexandria. So this story, you have immortals that you're on this mission with. Some of these immortals were pals with Hippocrates. They were hanging out with Galen. They lived through the Roman Empire. So I build games, and the one I'm currently working on, Symponia, which has to be finished within 2 weeks.
Whoa.
is Symphonia means adventure in Greek, and it's based on this Norse legend. So I've decided, based on the success of Netflix historical dramas and the fact that I like to build that way, all my games are Netflix historical dramas, and I'll give you some more information as we go along, but this should be a conversation, which means we both talk.
Absolutely. We have you here today, definitely to understand and see a lot more. I'm like super interested in all these things that you've been doing. And we'll be right back right after we thank today's sponsor. Creating adventures does sound daunting sometimes, but this episode's sponsor, Blue Rabbit, has your back at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. Dash is that, middle line that you have right there, because my friend Bernardo will be leading a 3-day online workshop this December from the 8th to the 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, that's in the US, to show you how getting players to complete challenges and ask for more is a lot easier than you actually expect. And you can learn how to set up challenges in a structured way, turn boring content into adventures, learn how to use a progression system that works on any scenario and lets players grow steadily and engaged at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. This workshop is open for anyone who wants to start the gamification basics and walk away with a complete gamified system. Grab this opportunity and learn with Blue Rabbit at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. That is bluerabbit.io/get-cert. One of the things that sort of got me curious as well, you were mentioning that you have now a sort of a game design unit within the World Health Organization. So the idea here, just to clarify and to see if you want to sort of go in that direction as well, is that you created this, this game design unit so that when they're going to create a new training, these people come to this game design unit to get trained on being able to do that and to get sort of paired up with game designers to create game-based learning. Is that right?
It is, but it doesn't work that way. We found better ways to work. Oh, and believe me, we've learned a lot by failures. The way it will work is that the subject matter experts, who are thoracic trauma surgeons, and you can imagine what you get in the WHO, right? Nutritionists, childbirth experts, contraceptive, emergency management. There's hundreds, there's 60 or 70 courses they've launched in the past year. There's 10 million.
Nice.
10 million students. Yeah, it's big. So the way it works is that this is under the direction of Dr. Nelson Olim, who is just absolutely a genius. He's my boss. He is one of the leads at the academy. He's a trauma surgeon. His specialty is mass casualty management. And we'll get onto that later, but they're doing a lot of work in augmented reality that I was working with them on that. And that's actually what I was working on before we got in the unit. So the way the unit works simply is you get your subject matter expert to sit down with your learning designer. So that's an instructional designer, but maybe that's what they call them. They call them a learning designer.
Yeah.
And that would be someone who has at least a master's in education and usually a Ph.D. And they can then plan the learning. Now, the learning designer goes to the game design unit, and they fill out now what's called, and we're in our final stages of building it out. It'll be ready to launch by the new year, what's called an ECP profile, which is an emotional cognitive performance instrument. So when you teach, we always think in terms of content. We think, let's get the facts out. Well, this reverses it and says, let's get the emotions out first and then add the facts to the emotional state. We know that works. That's more effective. There's no denying that in the literature. And the term emotional cognitive performance was coined by Dr. Catherine Bakos, who is an expert in many things. She works at the academy. So that's her term. I must give her credit. And I love it. So what it means is that you're going to come as the learning designer with things you want to do, whether it's, small group work, skills, labs, you name it. You fill out a form, an easy little, it's on a Miro board now, but it's going to be coded into a platform. And there are, on the y-axis, the teaching techniques you want to use. And on the x-axis, there's several categories of game elements. You must pick at least 3 game elements to have your course approved or it is not approved. Now, the game elements consist of things, for example, narrative and storification. Another game element is called achievement and reward systems. Another game element is called adventure games, because adventure games hit different neurotransmitter profiles than narrative does. Narrative could just be, hi, you're opening a car wash. Adventure games, they cause the release of cortisol and endorphins, like you tingle, like you're having an adventure. So you have to create those emotional profiles. Another category is called strategy. And we have a list of about 250 different strategy mechanics. Now, the idea is that the instructional designer fills out that form. All they have to do is fill out the little form. They have to check 3 boxes. Once that goes through our quality assurance committee, and it's approved. Then the game design unit takes over and says, okay, you said you want narrative, achievements, and strategy. All right, we'll build. What you don't want to do is have your subject matter experts pretend they're game designers. You don't want your learning designers and instructional designers to pretend they know about games. A game designer has a vision that comes from them, and it doesn't come from a committee or a team. It comes from one designer who can, working along with the learning designer, say, hey, here's the game I'm building for you. And now there's a communication there. You don't want someone who teaches physics to suddenly design a physics game. Now, if they do want to, we would let them. Hey, more power to you. But in most cases, you will not see any games produced unless there is mandatory teeth in the approval process. In order to get a game through WHO, when all this goes through, you must add emotional cognitive performance. There is no more content push there. You cannot just give them PDFs and lectures and tell them to swim. You're going to have to bring in things like achievement, narrative, adventure, strategy. Now, they can build a cute little game that is played each class for 10 minutes. That's cool. They might not have a game at all. They might be all Amy, Joe, Kim about it and say, look, we're just going to spice up your course with some narrative and achievements. It doesn't have to have a game at all. It simply uses what we know from video game evidence that will make the course emotionally engaging. Or you might decide, which I always want, to turn the whole course into a game. It's really up to you what you do. That's all negotiated. Does that make sense? And that's the model I'm advocating everywhere in the world right now.
It sounds beautiful. It sounds beautiful. I did have some interest because we're 27 minutes in or so. You were mentioning that you don't want the subject matter expert is like super clear to me that usually they don't want to be game designers. They want to do this, maybe do another one of these with you, maybe another 2, but they don't want to always do these things necessarily. They have other things to do, whatever that looks like. Usually a subject matter expert is not the one who's looking into these things. However, you said that there's the instructional designer or learning experience designer. Have you had experiences or is there a reason why you want to make sure you split that up together? Because I've seen some profiles that can sort of handle the 2 things. And being a game designer, of course, does not mean you know how to design learning. So I want to explore that a little bit with you.
Yeah, I'm going to be very honest with you. Instructional design and learning design now is trapped in the 1980s. They haven't progressed a lot. And I know some of them out there might take exception. And I know some of them are doing phenomenal work that would wow me. So exceptions exist. There's a culture of content push. And if they take over, that's what you get. You need someone to say, we're going to design the emotional engagement first. Then you will pour your content into the emotional engagement. They pollute it. They contaminate it. Instructional designers, there's a certain group think of articulate storyline, which is a piece of software that we feel a collective loathing about. Absolute loathing. Because everyone uses it. So instruction looks the same. Let's have a pause and reflect box. I'm sorry. When we come to game design, we need to separate the instructional designer from the game designer and not presume they're both. Now, and one of the worst sins, and this is opinion, a good deal of it is, we're talking, is game designers. They will crucify your material. You hire a game design company, mark my words, you will regret it. Now, what you hire them for is if you have a gamification pro that has built out the learning integration, and then you hire someone for $250,000 to build the graphics and come up with interesting mechanics they might have learned. They can add to it. But I am not at liberty to discuss the details, but I could have at least half a dozen examples where somebody made the terrible mistake of hiring a game designer who knows nothing about education, that thinks they do, and then decides we're going to build a learning game. And I have seen hundreds of thousands of dollars go down the toilet. So don't do it. I'm sorry, game designers. I don't pretend to do your job. Please don't pretend to do mine.
Like that was kind of where I was getting at, because
Throw
it's
down the gauntlet there, baby.
just standing on one of the sides. Let's assume for a second that I am the learning designer, right? Like standing there and saying, yeah, the difficult thing is actually to do learning design. That's the really difficult stuff, because that's what you do and you've been studying probably for many years. And saying, well, a game designer cannot do my job, but game design is all these mechanics. I've played many games, so I can be the game designer. Why not?
Well, we have a list of 250 to 300 mechanics on one page that you start with, and they don't know any of that. They played Monopoly. The worst, it's equivalent of when you're renting an apartment and you ask who did the renovations, and the homeowner says, I did them myself. Get out of there, right? They didn't hire a carpenter. I'm handy. No, you're not. You're just a dude with a hammer. A guy with a camera, we used to call them in the modeling industry. So you're not a game designer.
That was where I was getting at. That's from one side of it.
Your
On the other side of it.
Your teenage son plays Final Fantasy, so you ask him, and that helps you design a game. I drive a car. It doesn't mean I'm going to fix your motor. It's
absolutely.
Sorry,
absolutely.
I think you were moving ahead with.
No, but within that same argument, what I was going to say is, with all due respect as well, which I give absolutely to learning designers, especially the ones that are doing, as you were saying, like not just pushing content, we're doing other things, which I'd like to think maybe you're not the majority yet, but are turning into the majority. I think the field is also advancing as well and getting a lot of education from different people.
Sort of.
But on the other side of the spectrum, you say, well, I'm a game designer. Game designer is really difficult. And there's all these things, and there's all these mechanics, all these things you put together, designing emotions, all these things that you do as a game designer.
Yeah.
How difficult can it be to design something that provides some learning? I'm a game designer. People learn in my games.
When
right?
they were 7, they liked something, and so now they include it. I mean, to get a master's in education is a hell of a lot of work. Even to get a bachelor's degree in education, become a certified teacher, it's one hell of a lot of theory. You got to know it. I mean, and even then, because I'm a neuroscientist, I ask instructional designers, okay, tell me what learning is in the brain. They don't know. It's postsynaptic potentiation. It's the production of potassium channel proteins by opening of an operon that happens due to a cholinergic stimulus. There's a whole level of knowledge to learn. So game designers have to do their job, which is help the serious game designer, which is myself, realize their vision. And then they have tremendous knowledge. As I say, I want to make a game. When I was working on Sharmila with chaos theory, I created the game because I knew how the learning worked and I knew what I wanted. Then they came up with all kinds of interesting mechanics to help get that job done. And every time they strayed into teaching and learning, we steered them back and said, no. Get back to your corner. You're going to build experiences. And at the end of it, you're able to produce something that is – because the instructional designer doesn't know how to build games. There's so many concepts in game design. I mean, it's a 4-year degree. I mean, there's a Ph.D. in game design here in my province. So we all have our roles, and we can work with game designers, but you don't want them to design your learning the same way you don't want your mechanic to design a Lotus or Ferrari. They're a mechanic. They're not a car designer. They can't do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's what I see is sort of a triangle right there. You have the serious game designer, which in this case is yourself. You have a game designer or a game designer company, and you have the learning designer as well. Is that right?
Yeah, the learning designer or subject matter expert. I mean, it's just with me, it's different because I have a master's in education, a PhD in curriculum, so I can design learning with my eyes closed. But in most cases, you need to have someone think about the learning kind of carefully. Yeah. So, and the subject matter expert usually is terrible at that. They're a surgeon. They don't know all the different theories of problem-based learning and case-based. But yeah. I think my point about instructional design is that it's a cult, because anyone that doesn't do it gets fired. You've just gotten hired by a major company like FedEx, and they have stuff they want to do. And you're going to make, let's say, $100,000 a year as an instructional designer and benefits. It's a pretty peach job. Well, you better do what they tell you to do or you'll be fired. And they don't know anything about games, and they don't want to hear about games. And everybody, you go in a room, and there's 30 other people all working on Articulate and Camtasia. Well, you can't even design a game if you wanted to, because you don't have the technology. You need a game design engine. You don't know what to do. You might end up with Cahoots if you're lucky, playing Jeopardy. So you see the problem the instructional designers have. They're bound with twine. They're being keel-hauled on a pirate boat. And it's 1980s crap. It's based, and this is, again, opinion. This new persona stuff, all of this comes from behavioral neuroscience, and I have a dear friend who taught me a lot of this stuff, and I respect what they do, Dr. Brian Kugelman. You should have him on the show. He's incredible. So I know what they do. These are the guys at Google and Facebook that make you addicted. That's their job. And they are classifying everyone into personas, and they're helping Donald Trump win elections, and they're creating algorithms on Facebook to monetize it. And you know how Facebook operates. This more conflict there is, the greater the viewership. So they want to polarize people and get them screaming at each other about Biden, because that makes for good press. These are the people that are going to help me with learning? No. You know who I want to help me with learning now? Aikido masters, Tai Chi instructors, mindfulness experts, neuroscientists that work on learning and memory and recall. We need new voices to understand learning now in new ways. And I'm sorry, instructional design, 98% of it, at my university included, is rote crap from 1951. It's just online. And it's online crap. Now you don't even get humans to have a coffee with. You stare at your screen while someone gives you the business. It's disgraceful. And we have to fight it. And we don't do it by condemning instructional designers. We give it by opening to say, hey, here's what we recommend. Become an instructional designer and then study game design, even informally with a mentorship. Then you'll be what we want. Don't become a game designer and try to get the instructional design, because to learn basic instructional design is at least 5 years of work. Or otherwise, school teachers would have a month and they'd be out teaching. It is a 5-year project. You see where I'm going with it? Yeah. Let's have a new career path for instructional designers to specialize as serious game specialists. Then I think we have what we're looking for.
Absolutely. That I think is a high note with which we can sort of start closing up our conversation. How is a new route David Chandross is proposing now for serious game designers to go through, especially when it relates to learning? How do they get there? The route that you're proposing is definitely all the way through, knowing everything about learning as a first path, and then getting into game design, whether formally or informally. Yeah. So that is a great career path. I'm sensing here it kind of could be part of what your experience is. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a maturation of the fact that it takes a lot of knowledge to know how to do instructional design properly.
Absolutely.
So you've already got that. But game design, remember, at the end of the day, you really are responsible for teaching and learning. Because I'm in the world of training. I'm not in the world of conversion, so you buy more coffee. That's a different kind of gamification. That might be a marketing pro. But in my field, it's all about the learning. So you need to have qualifications in learning, or don't even get into it. Once you have those qualifications, you can add game design skills. I offer this course to my students. It takes them 16 weeks. It's a good start. Mentorships need to be available. So I guess I would say it's easier to learn game design and add it to instructional design to become a serious game designer. Now, when it comes to game design and you're coding and building 3D platforms in Unity, well, that's a specialty. And you got to know
that's
that.
a technical career for sure. That's a game developer probably.
That's the game developer that works with the serious game designer. So we have teams here, and each person brings a special gift to the team. In the old days, we did it all. And now we have specializations.
Absolutely. And specialization is a very, very significant and useful route for so many reasons, because we, as a specialist, as somebody who dedicates him or herself to this or that, you can definitely do it a lot better than somebody who's doing absolutely everything. That Renaissance man or woman definitely is something that, it gets more and more scarce. And making sure that you're able to do those things very well is really, really, really hard to come by, if that's even possible.
And I think I'd like, as we close, again, just to come back to this idea that I really am championing, and this idea of psychedelic education. And it doesn't mean taking psilocybin and then learning, although that could be interesting in itself. It is about the fact that we have subtypes of receptors in the brain called the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor subtype. And that seems to be involved in profound attitudinal change. Instantaneous behavioral change is possible. That's how psilocybin works. It's not taken regularly. It's taken once or twice and bookended with therapy sessions. And there was a study done by Roland Griffiths last year, and they took a group of people that they had profound religious conversion. They'd found Islam, or they'd found Christianity or Judaism. They had a profound conversion. And they had identical elimination of depression and its side effects to those that had taken the psychedelics. So what it means is that we have the capacity in our brain, probably through gamification, to produce real differences in the filter by which the world comes to us. And changing that filter reorganizes knowledge so that you begin to think like a doctor, think like a nurse, think like a chaplain. And I'm so interested in that. And I think we get at that through Jungian transpersonal education. And that is that when you teach to development. Go back to Maslow and read almost nobody's read Maslow. They know his theory, but no one I've talked to understands self-actualization. It wasn't just getting real good at surfing. It was a spiritual, and I don't use the word religious. I would never use it. I mean a spiritual journey, like Sam Harris talks about. That all of your learning, you should be asking a question of, why am I learning this, and why am I doing this job? What am I going in my life? What is this? And that holistic view is, I think, how we have to push people in game design. Because I'm in health sciences dealing with frail elderly, mass casualty management, emergency medicine, those are urgent questions to answer in the course of training. And what a wonderful way to introduce them than through going back to ancient Carthage and traveling in one part of the game where you travel east to Tibet, to the Himalayas, to study with Himalayan masters, to understand the origins of good and evil. I think you come out of a game like that as a better citizen, not just a guy who can serve up a Joe pretty quickly.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for this very open, very, diverse in many ways conversation. The triangle of serious game design, I would say, is one of many highlights on the conversation. However, David, at least for now and for today, for this episode, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And I'd like to know, how are you listening to this podcast? If you are doing it through a podcasting app, have you followed? Have you rated this podcast? Please go ahead and do so. That way we can reach more Engagers like you to achieve this mission of making learning amazing. There are instructions on professorgame.com/iTunes if you want and need them. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, remember to follow or subscribe absolutely for free using that favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. And Engagers, remember to check out our sponsor's online workshop about gamification that lets you walk away with a complete gamified system. It is none other than my friend Bernardo through his company and gamified platform Blue Rabbit. And you can register at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. This will be an online live workshop from the 8th to the 10th of December at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. That is US time, but for anywhere around the world. And you can find out more at bluerabbit.io/get-cert. Cert as in certification.